Thank you so much for coming, everybody. I do appreciate it. We're in Daniel chapter 7, verses 19 and on. We are going to try to finish up Daniel chapter 7 today and enter into Daniel chapter 8. Could I please have one person read for us Daniel chapter 7, verses 19 through 22, and the second person read verses 23 through 28. So 19 through 22, then 23 through 28. Thank you. Go ahead and start for me. Thank you.
Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, in which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its teeth. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this one made war with the saints, and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom.
Thank you so much. And another person, verses 23 through 28, please. Hey, brother. Welcome.
The fourth beast is the fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppose his saints and try to change the set times in the law. The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times and half a time, but the count will sit and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so where we are, remember from Daniel chapter 7, we're still in this interpretation zone of this magnificent vision of 4 beasts that Daniel's seen. In verse 19, we'll then be taking a look closer at the 4 great beasts. Remember that in the vision, the 4th beast was killed. Now in the interpretation, we're actually seeing more information about the 4th beast. Okay? So what makes the 4th beast different from all the rest?
Exceedingly terrifying.
Exceedingly terrifying. Right? I mean, this is a beast that strikes fear into the hearts of people, including Daniel. Okay? Remember, Daniel was popped into a lion's den. He seemed as cool as a cucumber. Right? So when he's seeing in this vision something that's exceedingly terrifying, we know it's something that's absolutely makes him afraid. What else do we see here? Teeth of iron and claws of bronze, right? What are teeth and claws to an animal?
Well, it sounds like they're going to tear apart.
Yeah, it's what they use to tear other things apart. It's their weapons, right? It's their weapons of warfare. At this time, iron and bronze are still the strongest things you can come across. Steel is not yet invented. Okay? So it's outfitted with the capability of making profound war. Okay? And it devours and it stamps what is left with its feet. What are the 10 horns then in verse 20? Yeah, very close. In verse 24, it's kings, right? So we'd have to jump forward. It says, as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise. And so the horns are representative of kings. The beast is necessarily the kingdom. Right? Now, kings and kingdoms are tied together. You can't have a king without a kingdom, and you can't have a kingdom without a king. Or a queendom, we should say, right? You have to have a ruler to sit on the throne to have something that is ruled. So whether we say kingdoms or kings, very little difference. But here the idea is that there is one continuous kingdom. There's 10 kings. Okay? So there's 10 of them, 10 horns that are on its head. What then comes up in the midst of those kings? Yeah, there's a little horn. What's the difference between a little horn and a big horn?
Can't blow as hard.
Well, he can't blow as hard. Not that type of horn, though. Yep, but very good. Yeah, it's the size, right? So we might even say maybe it's the power of, although this one's going to have some great power. But it's certainly the display of grandeur is less. Right? A big horn can have some grandeur to it. It looks grand. A little horn is popping up, doesn't look nearly as grand, and it displaces 3 of the bigger horns. Okay? Doesn't look nearly as grand. So it has less grandeur, but therefore it does what?
It has eyes in the mouth.
Had eyes and a mouth which did what?
Spoke boastfully.
Spoke boastfully. Right? Generally, in my experience, somebody who looks intimidating and looks big doesn't have to boast about much. Right? It's the little ones you got to worry about. Right? This king does not look grand, but what then comes out of the mouth? Grand things, right? Boastful things. God got to make itself look grand. But notice then that because of its eyes and because of its mouth, it seems greater than its companions. Still in verse 20. It seems greater than its companions. Right. Before we get into what it does, what questions, comments, or insights do you have? Verses 19 and 20. Yeah. Let's move into what he does. He actually prevails. He makes war against the saints and prevails over them. What does it mean to prevail over them?
Defeated them.
Yeah, he defeats them. He conquers them. Right? What's that? He's controlling, right? Yeah, he's domineering over. He's controlling them. He has them under his power, we might say. Right? What does this sort of remind us of as a model? Remember that Jesus too was prevailed over by the evil powers of this world, including both the Romans and the Jewish council. And yet in his defeat on the cross came ultimate victory. And he rose once more. Right? And here we're actually seeing that same pattern, but as a community-wide for the saints. Right? This power comes over, squashes the saints, and yet in that is going to become their victory. Okay, we're through that, we should say. in some places you'll hear about the church victorious. The church is just going to grow and grow and grow and keep moving up and up and up and up and doing wonderful and wonderful things. Well, actually, Daniel represents kind of the opposite picture, right? There's going to be times of great tribulation and even a prevailing over the saints. Okay? And we'll talk about that after we get to the end of verse 28. We'll then talk about how this is historical and how it still is yet to come. So we'll get into that. That's why I'm slipping in my language between saints talking about the church, and here in the context, though, the saints are who? Saints are the holy ones. Saints are those who belong to God. Okay, so in the ancient context, this would have been the ancient Jews, okay, within Daniel's time. Who saves them? Verse 22. Yeah, the Ancient of Days comes, right? Sets up judgment, and judgment was given, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Okay? Very good. Now that seems very final. As we go through the interpretation, things are going to seem a little less final, and we'll talk about how this is used and all of that sort of stuff. But I do want to go through the interpretation of 23 through 27 first. Questions or comments? Verse 23, interpretation. This is still the celestial interpreter talking. It says, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it to pieces. Now, it seems pretty simple here what's going on. There's just one question I have for us. What does the whole earth mean? Yeah. Historically, it's the then known kingdoms and lands. The then known kingdoms and land. The whole earth there is not talking about the globe as we would think about it. Right? Because remember, the vision is written to Daniel, and Daniel needs to understand it. So when the whole earth is talked about to Daniel, what's going on in Daniel's mind?
Just what they know.
Just what he knows, right? Babylon, Persia, Judea, right? All those kingdoms in there. Assyria. He's going to know a little bit about Egypt. He's going to know a little bit about the Greeks. And so that whole place is the whole earth. That's all they know. Right? So here is when I think that there's a lot of tendencies to say that this hasn't been fulfilled yet, or at least historically, because in our minds, when we read it, we're looking for a entire global kingdom.
Isn't that what most people that write about, try to interpret what these mean, they make it the whole earth, don't they?
Many will, yes. And that's where you get the 10 kingdoms. It's from here, 10 kingdoms of the earth. So, has anybody read the Left Behind series? It's Christian fiction.
I read it, some of it.
Yeah.
Stopped somewhere along the line.
Sure, yep. So in the Left Behind series, that's going to be like a prime example of how this interpretation of Daniel would be taken in to the modern day, and what they would have as a global antichrist over the whole earth, then 10 kingdoms divided up, right? And so you have a king over the America, and then North America, and you have a king over South America, you have a king over Africa, and a king over the Middle East, and a king over this section of Europe, and that's it, right? And they divide up the land sort of like that, okay? Now again, we'll talk more about that and whether or not we should be doing that. But when we're going through the interpretation for the first time, we need to look at it from a historical perspective. We need to think about what Daniel was thinking about and knowing about. And the language there then becomes very different. The whole earth does not necessarily mean the globe. Right? Doesn't mean it. When were the Americas, quote unquote, discovered? 1492, right? Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Right? That old rhyme, right? So Daniel is not thinking about Native Americans, right? Daniel is most likely not thinking about China, right? Or Australia, right? So we have to think about it. Okay, the whole earth is the then known kingdoms. All right. Questions for us?
We like 21 and 22 when it says,
Okay.
"The foreign makes war against the saints and prevail against them until Jesus comes back." That means we're going through the tribulation.
All right, so as I looked, this made war with saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. The question is, that's when Jesus comes back, so does that mean we're going through the tribulation? I want to hold on to that. Because what I want to do is I want to talk about the historical perspective first, and then we'll talk about modern day applications. Now, I agree with you on that premises, so I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just saying that I want to take us on a little bit of a journey here. Yeah. All right. Since it was brought up, why don't I just go here? One of the things that Wes is talking about is, will Christians be raptured before the tribulation that's found in Revelation? Again, going back to our Left Behind series, if you haven't read it, if you have good theology, it's just an interesting fiction read for you to see about how someone else might interpret it. And I'm not sure that there's great theology there, so I'm not necessarily recommending it as something to read, but it is an interesting read. One of the things that they have is the rapture, which is something that takes all believers on the globe up to heaven, and then people down here are in a mess, and they go through the tribulation, and more saints are formed as people respond to the events of the tribulation. Usually the hallmark of that is really taken from, I think, the book of Mark, but also mainly from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Okay. The issue with that is, throughout Scripture, there's only 2 prophesied comings of Jesus. That's it. What the rapture does is it makes a 1.5 coming. So you have a first coming, you have a 1.5 coming where he takes his first mark of people, then he has a fuller second coming. Okay? We can go through that if you all want, but I highly disagree with that perspective. What they do is, instead of simply making 1 Thessalonians 4 talk about the second coming, they divide it up almost nonsensically into a 1.5 coming. Okay, there is no 1.5 coming, there's only 2 comings. Okay. Another way to put that is whether or not we want to harmonize the texts or bring them apart when they're talking about something that seems very, very similar. If you harmonize them and bring them together, there's only 2 comings. If you bring them apart, then suddenly you have this 1.5 coming. Right? Now here's the danger. If people are expecting Jesus to come back and take all the faithful away from the earth, and then great tribulation starts and they say, well, this ain't the final days because we aren't gone, what do you think that does? Then people begin to say, look at the book of Revelation and go, wow, look at these things are matching up with the book of Revelation and we're still here. We're not supposed to be here. Is this real? We're not prepared to go through the trial. Instead, my perspective would be prepare for the trials. We need to prepare to go through the fire. We're going to look at this in Habakkuk today. The righteous were not delivered from the judgment of God when Babylon came and struck Jerusalem. The righteous had to endure the same punishment as the wicked. That seems to be God's modus operandum, the way God works through history. Right?
Persecution is what purifies the body.
Persecution purifies the body, right? He sits as a refiner's fire. Okay. So that's just another perspective. Would anybody like to dive deeper into that? I mean, I'd be happy to, but if you don't want to, we'll move on for now.
When I listen to David Jeremiah, he says everything's okay for the rapture to happen right now. And that gave me hope, because when I read about the tribulation, I don't want to be here.
Well, sure. There is the understanding that no one would want to go through the tribulation. To be honest, I hope there is a rapture. I just don't see it in the text. At least the way that I'm reading it, I don't see it in the text. But here's a disagreement. David Jeremiah is a high-profile pastor, very intelligent man, believes in the rapture. John MacArthur, very intelligent, high-profile, believes in the rapture. I would simply argue with them and say, actually, I think the rapture is probably something that makes us awful hopeful instead of getting us really prepared for battle. So let's go into this just from a different perspective. If we're hoping for Jesus to take us away in the rapture, are we sharpening our weapons and getting ready for the worst time of our lives? Probably not. When what we need to do is be polishing the armor of God, so to speak. We need to be sharpening right? We need to do those things that prepares us for real battle and real difficulty.
So tell me
Right.
what sharpening means to you.
So when I'm using there a very, very loose metaphor of the armor of God from Ephesians chapter 6. And so what I mean by sharpening the sword would be to be in the Word more, to be studying the Word more, right? To get it deep in our hearts. There may be a time they come for our Bibles to burn them. Well, what do? We need to have it in here and here as much as possible, that the Spirit may bring to mind what we need at the time that we need it. When I'm talking about polishing the armor, what I mean is that we need to be focusing on God and knowing His nature and understanding how powerful He is, so that when the massive hardships come, we've released ourselves in trust to the Almighty God, who is completely good and who completely has us in our hands no matter what happens to us. Right? So sharpening that shield, polishing that shield of faith, polishing the armor of righteousness, right? We need to be growing more, not laxing off. We need to strap on the gospel of peace. I heard from one of my elders yesterday that there was a statistic that came out that said for the first time in American history, we are now under 50% Christian in this nation. Well, we need to be sharing the gospel with a whole lot of people, because it's 1 out of 2 now that are not going to be Christian. Right? That means that there's a grand place for evangelism. Okay? So that's kind of what I mean by sharpening the tools and getting ready. Instead of, if we're hoping in the rapture, we might, not always, but we might think about just continuing as normal. And it shouldn't be the case. We should be going, all right, what we see about us, this means spiritual war. Right? We need to be thinking about praying. We need to be sharing the gospel. We're making disciples, bringing to the kingdom. We need to up the ante, not settle down. Yeah, that's all I'm thinking. Yeah. So. All right, other questions or comments on that?
It would be nice if all the preachers would believe the same way, instead of you hear a pastor here or a pastor there saying a little bit different things.
Yeah.
And it kind of blows my mind sometimes, especially when I listen on Sunday morning.
Sure.
And there's some that have certain things they stress, some stress something else, but it'd be nice if everything was, and we don't all interpret the Bible the same,
Sure.
so.
Yeah, we don't always interpret the Bible the same. end times matters are secondary issues. So we can expect disagreement among that. Gospel is a central issue. End times matters, nobody knows until we're there. So for example, for me, I can't remember when I preached from the pulpit about the end times. Now, I know we probably did it when we went through the Gospel of Mark. I got a call a few years ago about a survey. They were like, how many times do you preach from the book of Revelation per year? They were looking for something like 20 times. I was like, we did a series once in the past 10 years on the 7 letters of the... Right? So there's great differences there on how much that's talked about. For me personally, what I would say is examine the evidence, right? Examine it from the text and go from there. And if we're at disagreement, that's okay. Just end time stuff is a secondary issue. I do understand that you'd want to hear more preachers on the same line. What you'll find is that on the main topic of the gospel, there is great agreement among those pastors who are actually saved and are actually part of the church. On secondary issues, there can be a broad spectrum of stuff, like how we view different sorts of things. What you'll find from and when somebody's central on the gospel, then you know they're good to go. Even if they disagree on some secondary issues or come at stuff from a secondary point of view. You'll know the sharks and the wolves when they preach as good news something that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Right now in the Methodist Church is going wild, the United Methodist Church. Right now they're featuring this person, or the person's getting featured. They have a drag queen pastor who preaches in drag. I use that loosely, preaches in drag. Right? And is introduced as the person's drag name is Penny Cost. Right? Pentecost, Penny Cost.
Okay.
Right. When you come across stuff like that, just stay away from it with a 10-foot pole, right? Because that's not, and then that casts a huge shadow on the entire United Methodist Church. Like, how in the world are they even letting that happen? And that's not the only case of it. Right?
How about our own government allowing the liars in there?
Yeah, so what I would say with regards to our government is that we need to be in deep prayer. So we need to be in prayer for those who are Christians, and we need to be in prayer for the salvation for those who are not. Here's the thing, though. When an unbeliever acts like an unbeliever, it's kind of like a whoop-de-doo. Like, yeah, the government's corrupt. They're loaded with unbelievers. Do we really expect anything else? Right. The church has far too long expected unbelievers to live like Christians when that's impossible for them. What we should expect is, unbelievers are going to be full of vice and sin. If there's one that's decent, glory to God for that grace, but the overall case is going to be not good. Right?
Say
So
that again, I didn't hear it.
the overall case is not going to be good.
No.
So the government and the church, for me, I come down really hard on the church. The government, I just pray for. Right? Like, that stinks that this is happening. The church should be above board. Even if we're struggling with sin, the church should at least be able to say something as obvious as a drag queen preaching is wrong. Like that should be pretty obvious for us. So, we have to...
But there is a difference. There are some Methodists that aren't part of the United Methodist,
Sure, yeah.
and they don't believe that.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So, and I wasn't going to go here. The United Methodist Church is currently splitting. The United Methodist Church is going to become the more liberal. Then the Global Methodist Church is going to become more conservative. Except for, there's very conservative churches in Africa, who are not giving up on the United Methodist Church. So that's just creating for the world, it's just going to be a little wild. And then there are also Free Methodists. Free Methodists are those who are not attached to the United Methodist Church, and so there's that too. And we shouldn't stereotype all United Methodists as going bad. That's certainly not the case. I'm just saying it shines a poor light upon the whole church.
I know my brothers talked to me about the changes coming, and he's really sad about it, but
Yeah.
he's even thinking about leaving that church, so I don't know.
Yeah.
He said you had to make up your mind what you believe and what you didn't believe, so.
Yep. Yep.
Seems like we have enough to worry about ourselves, but.
Yeah, our denomination is not any better. And didn't mean to say that, but yeah.
Isn't it often a very small, very vocal group that can really influence the...
So here's the interesting part. It's small vocal groups can do an awful lot, but watch the small vocal group grow. And then watch the others start to leave church altogether. Right? Like when I'm out and about, I meet Christians, and one of the things I go is, where are you going to church? I don't go to church.
You are church.
Well, they are church, but they need to actually be with other believers, right? And so, yeah, they are the church, and they also need to be with other believers. And so, I don't know where I was going with that. I'm sorry. Yes, but it starts with a small vocal group. But it's interesting how that small vocal group grows. Yep, it's just interesting. Yeah. Okay, that's enough on that, I think. Anything else?
Jesus said in Matthew 24,
Mm-hmm.
immediately after the tribulation in those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Then shall you see the sign of the Son of Man coming in heaven. Then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory.
Amen. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Jesus said after the tribulation, when he's coming back.
Right. Yep. After the tribulation, he's coming back. And I think that's a designated second coming. Right there. And you were looking at Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31. I believe, at least. Matthew, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Of course, the clouds of heaven is making a allusion back to Daniel chapter 7, verse 14. Right? 13 and 14. So we're having that link together there. Thank you. All right, let's continue onwards then. So we're in verse 24. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. Okay. This is where things kind of get interesting, because on the history scale, we ask, who is this and how does it work? John Goldingay, in his commentary of the Word Biblical Commentary on page 378, is going to say that 10 kings must be the predecessor of the small horn. 3 are among the 10, not in addition to. The horns are overthrown, and then he lists Seleucus IV, Demetrius, and young Antiochus, if Antiochus IV is the little horn. Okay, and so that's kind of what's going on there. That would actually be in the Greek Empire, which is interesting because normally we want to associate the 4th with Rome, because in the statue vision it very much seems that the 4th is Rome. This is actually the Greek Empire that comes before the Roman Empire. Who is the very well-known Greek conqueror that just takes over the world? Yeah, Alexander the Great, right? And Alexander the Great is he's gonna conquer all of Greece, come down, he's gonna take Egypt, he's gonna take the Middle East, he's gonna take Assyria, he's gonna take Babylon, he's gonna take Persia, and he's gonna drive all the way down to India, where he dies at the age of what, 27 or 29? I mean, it just insane what he was able to do. But then the Greek Empire actually fractures apart. And there are all these different kind of parts of the Greek Empire with different rulers over them. Okay? And most likely Antiochus IV is the one who takes over the Middle East for a time. Most likely he's the little horn that's being talked about. Okay? What questions might you have? Now here's what's fascinating. Let's head into verse 25. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Shall think to change the times and the law. They shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. What does it mean to wear out the saints?
Persecution.
Yeah, it means profound persecution to the point of utter exhaustion. Right? Has anyone used that terminology before? I'm just worn out. What do you mean when you say I'm just worn out? Right? I'm just exhausted. I'm tired. At the end of the rope, can't go another step. Right? Can't go on anymore. And that's what he's going to do to the saints. Actually, that is what Antiochus IV also does to the Jews of the time in Jerusalem and in the surrounding area. What Antiochus IV wants to do is wipe out all those backwater barbaric ways of the Jews and implement good old-fashioned Hellenism. Right? What's Hellenism? Hellenism is Greek culture. Right? What he said is, you silly Jews, all the gods are one. You worship the Most High God. That's the same as worshiping Zeus and the same as worshiping Baal. Right? Now remember, he's not a Jew. So he causes devastation. It's just a crazy, crazy thing that happens. But he's going to walk in. He's going to enter into the temple of God, set up before an altar, and sacrifice a pig on it. Right? That just desecrates the entire temple. It takes a very, very long time for them to complete all the purification rites on the Jewish temple. Okay? So it's not good what he does, that's for sure. He shall think to change the times and the law. What do you think that refers to? Change the times and the law.
My Bible says alter the seasons.
Yeah, alter the seasons, right? What does it mean to alter the seasons?
Well, maybe that's what's happening now. We have warm weather 1 week, it drops 20, 30 degrees the next week.
Yeah. Maybe that's what's happening now. Not that exotic, unfortunately. Yeah, and he doesn't have that power. At least Antiochus IV did not.
What you were saying, is this a prediction of this Alexander the Great? That's not
No.
that.
I'm so sorry. So the initial beast and the initial conquering happens under Alexander the Great. The fourth beast, that beast starts with Alexander the Great. Here we're actually talking about the little horn, which is Antiochus IV, who happened sometime after Alexander. The vision is compressing a whole lot of time into one thing and putting it together as an actual figure. Right? So the beast, the fourth beast, is a kingdom. Is the Greek Empire. That lasts for several hundred years. Okay? The horns are all different kings in the line. They can be sequential. Some of them are also concurrent. And Antiochus IV is a small horn who comes up and displaces 3 of those horns along a timeline within the Greek kingdom. Okay, does that help a little bit? Okay, yeah. That's okay, yep. Yep.
It's clear as mud.
Yeah, it's clear as mud. Great. I'm glad. Yeah, so if I had the energy, I would get up and make a little picture for you. I don't have the energy for that today. I'm sorry. Yep. Change the seasons. What's fascinating is you have two different perspectives here. One is from Joyce Baldwin's commentary. What she's going to say is this: there are four characteristics of his rule given: blasphemy, long drawn out persecution, a new table of religious festivals. We talk about changing the seasons, changing the times. One of the ways throughout history that's been interpreted is changing the religious festivals. And of course, the ancient Jews would have had a table of religious festivals to do. Passover, right? All of those sorts of things. So by changing the festivals, he's changing the seasons. Right? It's not a matter of temperature there. It's a matter of changing the religious festivals, which then changes the way they mark time. All right? And changes the law. So what she says is, this is a new morality. A new morality is what he puts in place. What does that mean? Well, you silly barbaric Jews, you're not going to have unclean food anymore. Right? You're going to eat pig. If you don't eat pig, we're going to kill you. Okay, that sort of thing. Right? Those sorts of changes in the laws. Okay? And he has. And that's stuff that happened under Antiochus. All right? Let's stop there. What questions might you have? And then I'll offer a second interpretation of that same stuff.
Yeah, doesn't time and times and a half, so dividing a time, doesn't that mean the tribulation period?
We're gonna go over that next. Yep, let's stay on the first part of the verse though. Yep. All right, here's what John Goldengaze says as his interpretation. He is going to disagree with an implementation of new religious festivals and new morality. Here's what he's going to say. He says this is more general. It's talking about all the same thing. He says, in forcing his way to the throne and bulldozing his way through history, Antiochus has defied the shaping of history otherwise laid out. So that's what he's just going to say, that change in the times and the law and blasphemy, all he's doing is being a bulldog in history, making his own way and changing what should have been. So two little bit different interpretations there. I prefer Joyce Baldwin's, but I did want to bring in John Goldengaze as well.
So did those changes stay, or did the Jewish kingdom try to go back to the old seasons?
Yeah, the changes did not stick. Antiochus dies pretty soon after, and there's a big rebellion. I do not think that this is the rising up of the Hasmonean dynasty. I think that comes later, I believe. But Antiochus IV dies pretty quick after this, and the changes don't stick.
At the time of the Maccabees, wasn't
I can't remember. You think it is? All right. So the Maccabees are the huge family. Many of them die martyrs. But the Maccabees are the ones who start a rebellion against Greece. And they start what's called the Hasmonean dynasty. In between the Greece Empire and the Roman Empire, there was actually a freestanding Jewish kingdom until the Romans come in and squash them. You don't see that in the Bible. You'd have to read the book of Maccabees for that, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But in history, that's actually how it's laid out. And that's why when Jesus comes, they're expecting a Messiah figure to boot out Rome. Why? Well, it's because Judas Maccabee had done that with the Greeks 150, 170 years beforehand. Okay, so that's where that kingdom kind of comes in. Yep. I'd have to brush up on when exactly that takes place. But all right, so let's talk about time, and half a time. What's interesting here is it can be taken two ways. It can either be taken as a times, so 3 years and 3 years and half a time, like a year and a half or something like that, and it comes out to about 7 years. And this is where preachers will say that the Great Tribulation will last 7 years. This is the text that they're getting it from. However, among commentators, there's actually a very different understanding of times, and half a time. What they say is this: it seems like this length of evil will stretch on forever, and yet suddenly it gets cut in half. Right? Time, and half a time, suddenly it ends. See, because there's a progression. There's a time, then there's a multiple of times, and it seems like if it was going in that order, you'd find even more times, but instead the final time is cut in half and the period of persecution ends. So what commentators would say is that this is not meant to be like a specific period of history, like a specific time you just map out, here's this portion of years, here's this portion of years, and here's this portion of years. They'd simply say this is a period of persecution that suddenly stops and it ends. That's meant to give great hope. Okay. We'll start there next week, but I'm seeing the time and I'm 5 minutes past. Thank you so much. Hope to see you all upstairs. Blessings to you.